Hello, everyone, and welcome to another lecture in critical writing. So, today I would like to talk about the centerpiece of critical writing, the research paper. Now, the research paper is in any critical writing class, they are teaching not only the research paper and assigning that, but the reason why this becomes such a focal point for classes like English 120 and critical writing is because the research paper is a type of assignment that you see cross curriculum, cross departmental. This is something that you will see in the humanities and the sciences and all over the place. The research paper really is this. I guess it's at the heart of academia. And the reason why is that it is very very much the assignment where you pour into the assignment the accumulation of whatever it is that you're researching. So basically, it's such an independent project where you're saying, okay, this is my topic. I am going to go to the library. I'm going to go online. I'm going to find resources. And then in that, you have, with this pursuit of resources, you start to develop sort of an idea or a direction where your paper is going to go, because you approach it. Every research paper starts with a research question, right? So even before we've come up with a thesis statement, which we've talked about what thesis statements are previously, but even before we come up with our thesis statement, we have to start first with a research question. Now, with the size research paper we are going to do, our research questions have to be specific enough to where we're not essentially writing an entire book, but also general enough that we're not going to end up in a sort of verbal cul-de-sac after about 200 words. So this idea of like a research question comes from what we're curious about, right? So a research question is essentially the stepping stone toward the thesis statement, right? So we go from a question to a statement. And so a research question, by and large, will give us that thesis statement that is sort of more open-ended, right? Like we're not creating a yes or no thesis, right? So it's like if our research question is smoking bad for you? Obviously we can clarify and be like, what do you mean by bad for you? Bad for your health, bad for your lungs. Either which way, that'd be a short essay. It'd just be the thesis statement is, yes, smoking, not good for you, not good for your health. And that we have copious amounts of scientific research that all sort of agree on that. Just don't tell the Philip Morris Company, or usually they get pretty litigious about that. But either which way, the research paper, and I speak of it as this general thing because there are several kinds of research papers, right? Like there are research papers that are written in a way to be informative, right? There are research papers that are written in a way to be argumentative, and I'm sure you can guess which one we're doing. Since this is very much class derived on argument and derived on persuasive writing and, all kinds of things like rhetoric and appeals, we are going to be writing an argumentative essay. And that essay is going to be fueled by our research And that research is going to, and I'm going to be very careful with how I word this because I think this is very important. Research in any way should not be the entirety of our opinion, nor should our opinion be what it is without research at all. It's kind of a balance, right? So if our opinion is what it is, right? Like if we have an opinion, say let's say something crazy like vaccines cause autism, right? If that's our opinion, then what's going to happen is that we are going to approach that research looking specifically for instances where vaccines cause autism or studies that agree with us. Now, that is very problematic. Why is that problematic? Well, it is problematic because if we do that, the internet is such a wide place that we can find an opinion that matches ours entirely. We can even find ones that look rather official, right? But really what happens is once you dig into it, you start to realize, yeah, you might find a study where they say like vaccines cause autism. And that study will then lead to other studies that cite that study, right? So that's where it becomes a problem is this information that starts to sort of propagate, right? And so you have more and more and more things that just cite that all just kind of trickle back to this one study. Whereas, if you have something like, this idea that vaccines are safe and healthy and in no way cause autism, and let's just address for a second this fear that vaccines causing autism, that is incredibly ableist, right? We can all agree on that because it's basically telling people to fear autism, right? Telling people to fear their children getting autism, and really just that children, that we can't detect things like autism in early stages, and that's just correlation, not causation, right? Because the age at which your body is able to receive vaccines also happens to be the age at which you can start first detecting signs of autism, right? But anyways, so I just want to address that's it's just incredibly ableist. So anyways, so when we look at like, oh, there are many studies that show this, right? And we're going to talk about that too. I'll probably post a separate lecture talking about how we can best determine whether or not a source is credible, right? Because the credulity of our sources is so necessary in order for us to have a sound argument, right? Because when we talked about appeals, we talked about ethos, right? So this whole idea that in having an appeal to authority, well, it means actually citing a credible authority, and not some, in the case of, sorry, I have like a hair that's like caught right in my little like mustache stubble, and it keeps tickling my nose. So this notion, so this study that typically gets cited in terms of like saying vaccines cause autism, this study is cited, but it has since been debunked. The creators of that study have basically had the work pulled down because it's no longer seen as credible. It's bunk, it's hokum, as it were, right? So research is foundational to not just our experience as scholars, right? Because we have to be able to know what good information is, because we live in, as we're often told, we live in the information age, right? So information is out there and plentiful. And so this idea that, information, and I'm not saying good information or bad information. um, Information, I think, on its own is neutral, and it's what we do with it that's bad. And unless it's something like misinformation or disinformation, which I'll talk about that in a second. But being able to be critical of our sources, to be um, to really look at the information that we are being given and scrutinizing it in a healthy way, not just being somebody who's like, oh, that's a lie. No, a healthy way. um, I think it's so important, especially with the fact that, like, I open up my Instagram and I get news stories all the time, and it's some are from credible news sources. Like I follow Democracy Now, which is a credible news source, and we can get into why that's credible if people care. But then there are others. There are news sources that are, just people that are individuals posting, right? Now, the important thing is that when we see something like that and it's just an individual posting, and it's on their personal account, we have to question that. Why do we have to question that? Well, I'll tell you why. We just don't know their authority, right? What are their sources? Now, you're watching this video, and it might be on our classes page, but I upload this to YouTube, right? So anybody can watch me, witter on for. I think I've recorded hours of footage at this point over the course of this semester, right? And what are my sort of credentials, as it were? Why are all of you listening to me? Who am I? I'm many of you. I suspect all of you I've not met in person. So you wouldn't know me from necessarily a hole in the wall. For all you know, I could be AI, except my hands. Look at these fingers. You can't get that AI. Not yet, at least. Pretty good hands. And they move. I don't have like 7 thumbs. But yeah. So, being critical of our information sources is crucial in order to, I want to say survive, but kind of survive this landscape, this digital landscape where we have tons of information at our fingertips. Now, I've mentioned before, I have a very conservative father, and I myself am not. I am, a leftist, as I've said before. And when I talk to my dad, it is very clear, like, we could be talking about the same thing, right? So in the last election, and we're talking back in November, there was a proposition for all New York, right? I was living in Queens at the time, and my dad was living up here in White Plains. And so the one common proposition that we had was Prop 1. Now, talking to my dad about it, you would think it was a completely different proposition than how I understood it. Now, I'm not saying, I'm right and he's wrong. But you would think, based on what he was talking about, it was a completely different proposition. Like, he was, and so it leads me to believe that between his and my news sources, there is a massive discrepancy. That's alarming, isn't it? So okay. Sorry, my dog came over, sat under my chair, laid down, or lied down, and then he just got up and walked away, and I kind of feel offended. Uh, I can't help but take that personally. So, um, so yeah, it makes me really wonder. Like, there's an incredible discrepancy between our sources. If both of us have this completely different understanding, and now keep in mind, I'm not saying who's right and who is wrong. I think right and wrong is tricky business, you know. However, who's accurate, whose information was most accurate, is a great question. However, this just leads me to talk about something that I will post in a further lecture. Analyzing our resources. It's so necessary. And so, as we saw with our readings of They Say, I Say, when we are quoting a source, when we're paraphrasing a source, it's so necessary for us to explain what that source is saying, because we don't want to assume the obvious, right? Because what I find obvious, no one else does, right? Or not no one else, but by and large, what I might find obvious, you may not, right? What I find obvious is the product of my circumstances and my experience, and your experience with what is obvious is completely different than mine. So we cannot simply say something is obvious and therefore we don't need to explain it. It pays to explain, especially if you're being paid by the word, right? Anyways, that's silly. So when it comes to a research paper, what we are largely doing is we start by asking a question. We pick a topic, right? So our topic could be plastic pollution in the ocean, right? And with that topic, we then start asking questions, right? So you might ask yourself, oh, well, how much pollution in the ocean is microplastics, right? How much of it is like just big honking gallons of gallon-sized plastic bottles? How much of it's microplastics? How is that a threat, right? Then maybe you start researching that. You start searching, say, microplastics in the ocean. You'd get a lot, right? Is microplastics in the ocean harmful? That's kind of a yes or no question, right? So a yes or no answer would give us a very short paper. So how can we change a question to give ourselves more than just a yes or no answer? Now we do that through making it more open-ended, not vague, open-ended. Now, something open-ended is like a question that's open-ended is one that requires more than a yes-no answer, one that requires more than just like a statistic. Like we could say how much microplastics or how much microplastics are in the ocean. We would get a specific number. That's a very short question. So again, it's not very open-ended. Perhaps what we can search is how is microplastics in the ocean harmful? We start getting more of a broad answer, because then you would have to explain that, right? So if we're starting to think about these things, right? Okay, so how are microplastics in the ocean harmful? We start like doing our research. We're tip-tapping away on the keyboard, and what it reveals to us is that, microplastics are getting embedded in the algae, right? And algae are responsible for, the largest portion of oxygen in our atmosphere, as well as taking the largest amount of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Well, that sounds important, right? Because more carbon in the atmosphere means that it causes a larger climate shift, right? Our climate becomes more and more unstable and more um, going toward the extremes. And keep in mind, I am talking as though climate change and climate crisis is a real thing. So, which again, the research would support. Um, so we start looking at microplastics. Okay, oh, that's maybe we're onto something, right? Okay, so microplastics, algae, and we ask more and more questions, right? How can we clean up microplastics from algae? Can you scrub algae? Right? Like start asking these questions even if they kind of sound silly to you, because that's how we get answers, is by having curiosity. Curiosity is such a gift when you indulge in it, right? When you start being curious and searching for answers. And so notice when I say searching, it is a proactive thing, right? You know, the whole idea of like the word discover, right, is we have the prefix dis, which is to like, you know, to say disrobe when you like, you know, get naked and all that such, or to dismantle when you take something apart. This idea of dis is like that idea of undoing something, right? And so when you discover something, you imagine that it is covered and we are discovering it. We are removing the cover, right? Because let's face it, all of these things are already there, right? When they talked about discovering new nations, those nations existed, you know, and all we are doing is removing the cover. That is what curiosity does for us, is that we are slowly but surely removing the cover from all of the things that we don't know, that exist, that are here for us to explore, right? So what I'd like for us to do, and so this is our official research paper assignment, and so I'd like for us to start by drafting a research. Well, first, topic. What's your topic? And topic can be kind of broad. I would like something more specific. So, like I said, microplastics in the ocean. You know, if one of you is like jazzed up hearing that, go for it. If that's not your thing, don't worry about it. What I will say is think about topics that are important to you, right? These topics can be, you know, any number of things. I leave it wide open for, you know, for what your topics can be, so long as they are not like topics that are, you know, obviously misogynistic, anti-trans, anti-queer, and, you know, racist. I feel like I shouldn't have to say these things, but I say these things just in case. And I say or ableist, and the list goes on of things that I think we should not necessarily argue, right? So, but by all means, if you want to, I've had nursing students before use the research paper as a way of researching, you know, treatments for certain disorders, and whatnot. So, world is your oyster. Just it's a loving oyster. All right. You know, everybody. You know, we are treating every person as a person. All right. So we are not going to do things like argue for harmful things for people, like conversion therapy or uh, so on and so forth. All right. And, you know, hey, I might get in trouble for that, but being loving should not be the crime. Um, but either which way, so start thinking about the things you're interested in. It could be something in your major if that really is your interest, right? Perhaps if you are an accounting major, maybe you can argue against, you know, our current. I say this because obviously, 10 days until tax day. I think it's the 14th, right? Well, uh, say you're an accounting major and you want to argue against our current way of doing taxes. Start asking questions. Why do we do it this way? Right? Certain countries, you just get a little like index card in the mail that says like, hey, here's how much you owe, here's how much you get back. Does this look correct to you? Great. Like they already do the work. Right? So what if we just shift all of our accountants to the IRS? What a world, right? There are so many things that we can argue and argue for, and research can help us do that, because we talked about this last time with our appeals, but a research paper is taking all these things that we've learned and packing them into a paper, right? We are going to take, using statistics, using facts, using personal anecdotes, using various figures of authority in the field, whether it's interviews with professors or scientists or organizers, whatever it happens to be, right? So our first assignment is going to be selecting a topic and then creating a research question. So start asking questions. And that research question, when we start Googling, we start searching Google Scholar, JSTOR, using the PACE library, okay? All of that. When we start doing that, we might start getting an idea of our answer. Now, keep in mind, when it's an argumentative research paper, our thesis statement is opinion-based, meaning it's not a dead-end fact. You know what I mean? It's not like me saying, oh, does gravity exist, right? Or, because then that would be a very short thesis statement. I would just be like, I'm here to argue that gravity exists. I mean, that feels satirical. Like, that feels like it would be a really funny paper that you could possibly write, but not for this class. If you've got a humor class, then go for it. Sorry, I'm imagining that paper in my head, and that's really funny. Either which way. So, opinion based. So maybe what you can talk about is, yes, we know microplastics are a danger for the ocean, but what is the solution there? Maybe your research gives you an idea of a possible solution. So pose a solution. Maybe the solution isn't necessarily just ocean cleanup, because all that does is kind of like let's face it, the litter and the pollution that we have, well, if we clean up, there's going to be more. So that's only a partial solution. So maybe what you'd start arguing is, you'd start arguing for because we have a more sustainable way of farming trees. Well, maybe you're going to say, oh, the way of stopping microplastics in the ocean is by going directly to the source and making sure that as many one-time use plastics that are not medical are switched to cardboard or something, right? Keep in mind, this is just off the top of the head. Don't start writing your research paper just on this. But perhaps that's something that you would then argue, right? Is this, in order to better stem the flow of pollution in the ocean, especially of microplastics or plastics in general? that we need to, maybe you have a 3-step plan and that's your research paper. I don't know. So find your topic, create your research question, and get searching. Start searching. Start searching JSTOR. Start searching Paste Library. Start searching Google Scholar. See what the experts have to say. And then in your research, you kind of start to become an expert yourself, and you start to come up with opinions of your own. This is what I was talking about before, right? We cannot just have an opinion and then look for research that backs us up. That's called cherry picking. And we're going to talk about logical fallacies next week, so don't worry. But we cannot simply have an opinion that is only derived from the research, because then that's just quoting the research. You have your own mind, you have your own set of thoughts and creativities. So let the research inform you. Don't let the research just purely shape what it is that you think, right? So the research paper is something that is going to be a large process, and it's something that I'm, by and large, that's going to be the focus for most of the rest of the class. And I will just piecemeal this out, and I will just be really on top of like reading your responses and getting back to you. All right, but the topics are endless, and if you need help picking a topic, always feel free to email me and text me, or email me or text me. If you do both, it's just overkill, right? Although I'd be bound to see it. I've been having trouble with my email recently, so I apologize for any late emails. For some reason, it keeps signing me out. Pace. But either which way, I apologize for the mess behind me. As you can see, I haven't gotten more unpacking done. It's been a busy week. So, focus on coming up with a topic and coming up with a research question. That's your assignment. I'm going to be posting that. And I want you to think, okay, this is going to be, I'm going to figure out how many words it is, but 7 to 10 pages. All right, folks? Yeah, 7 to 10. 7 to 10 pages. And think about writing for that extended period of time. I'm sure for many of you, this might be the longest academic paper that you've written. And start figuring out, what's a topic I can talk about at length, right? And when I say the topics are open to anything, I am somebody who I wrote about transness and monster girls, right? That I have an article out that's about that, right? That was years ago now. Long time. So I'm open. Like if you want to argue for certain things, go for it. Certain interpretations perhaps of media. Yeah, why not? That's a form of research as well. I just recently was, oh gosh, I was the guest editor for this journal, the Humanities Review. I know it's backwards. I have yet to figure out how to flip this. And we have several, so there's poetry in here, there's art, and we have several essays in here, and there's really great arguments being made. One person was, let's see. One person was arguing for reclaiming Black creativity in the age of digital erasure. And she was basically talking, there was a specific dance. This is only going to make me sound old. There was a specific dance on TikTok, and I forgot the name of the dance. And it was created by a young Black woman. That dance was then essentially taken from her and replicated by other folks. And those other folks, white folks, it is necessary to say, then took credit, right? That's a problem. At least to me. I look, if someone retells my joke, give me credit, cite your sources. Um, so what she was kind of arguing about is that this is kind of a long-standing tradition. Like there's a lot of artists who took from black culture and the black community, um, and or African cultures, and kind of took credit for that, right? Um, and so she was kind of arguing a way of reclaiming um, sort of the creativity of black women, and it was like specific. She was specifically focused on the voices of black women. So I mean that's one argument. That's a great argument, and that's dealing with anybody who wants to talk about social media. And just ask me. I can send you the article. Um, so yeah, a lot of great articles in here. I say that because I picked them. But either which way, um, this is an example of a scholarly resource, right? Um, and so we'll talk about sources in the next video. All right, but right now, just start finding what it is that you want to talk about. Find what it is that you can talk about at length, and don't and avoid the topics that have been like done to death, right? Like there's just some topics that it's like every school is written about, right? It's, topics about social media and the effects on your mental health. That's been argued. Also, it's not even much of an argument, right? Um, so yeah, skip the no does, skip the no shit Sherlocks, skip the things that might almost uh be that kind of thing of like why are we talking about this? Go for the things that make you curious. Go for the things that intrigue you. Because you're going to be spending so much time with this paper, enjoy it. And I know that's a tall order. Enjoy a research paper, but for real, like, you know, really though, enjoy it. Like, if it's gonna be something you're spending so much time on, it better be a topic that you enjoy, right? And I will accept so many different topics. I say this. I myself have written a fair few, like, you know, interesting. I find interesting topics, but you might think is absolute Looney Tunes. But yeah. So yeah, start drafting those topics. Start thinking of those research questions. Get curious. Stay curious, and find out the answers to the questions that you yourself are asking. That's what we're doing. All right. Have a great week. Bye. I need a sign off. Maybe I should do a poll, class poll on sign offs.